Over the weekend, we learned that ABC News had settled a defamation lawsuit with Trump for $15 million. The lawsuit alleged that ABC News anchor George Stephanopoulos had defamed Trump when he misspoke several times during an interview and said that a jury had found Trump liable for rape when it actually found him liable for sexual abuse. It's worth noting here that the judge in that very case clarified that the jury's verdict did not mean that Trump's accuser failed to prove that Mr. Trump raped her, as many people commonly understand the word rape. But it's hard to imagine that Donald Trump brought that lawsuit because he really cared about the legal distinctions here. Trump likely brought that lawsuit as part of a campaign to silence his critics and to keep controversy at bay. And that campaign is ratcheting up. At a press conference yesterday, Trump celebrated the ABC settlement and indicated that he wanted to bring lawsuits against even more media outlets. The newspaper Donald Trump was threatening there is the Des Moines Register, the paper of record for the state of Iowa. The pollster Trump mentioned is veteran pollster Ann Selzer, who published a poll in the final week before the election showing Donald Trump behind in a reliably red state. Late last night, Trump made good on his threat and officially filed suit against the Des Moines Register and Ann Selzer for publishing that poll. Now, the suit was brought not as a defamation case, but as an alleged violation of Iowa's consumer fraud protection laws. The Register poll in the question was spectacularly wrong, as a number of polls in the election were, and Trump went on to win Iowa by 13 points, which was actually a wider margin than his victory in 2020 and in 2016. But Trump's allegation here is that the poll was somehow manipulated to make him look bad. And that allegation appears completely unfounded. It is hard to imagine how that claim will stand up in court, but that may not actually be the point here. A legal battle with Trump is going to likely be quite costly for the Des Moines Register at a time when the paper does not have considerable resources with which to fight. The Des Moines Register's parent company, Gannett, is the largest newspaper publisher in America, but it has been losing money at a steady clip for the last few years. Gannett lost more than $19 million in the third quarter of this year alone. Now, to understand how the paper found itself in such a vulnerable financial position, you have to look past Donald Trump, and you need to look at the man who was standing next to Trump at that same press conference. Do you see him in this picture? Now, the reason Trump called that press conference in the first place was to celebrate a supposed $100 billion U.S. investment from a company called SoftBank. And that company is headed by the CEO, a man named Masayoshi Son, who is known to the business community simply as Masa. Masa is the 51st richest billionaire in the world, according to Forbes, which has called Masa one of the world's most powerful people. From 2019 until 2021, Masa's company owned the Des Moines Register's parent company, Gannett, through a private equity subsidiary called Fortress Investment Group. Fortress then merged Gannett with another newspaper company to make themselves the largest newspaper owners in America. And then they started hacking away at newsrooms across the country. From 2019 to 2021, Gannett cut more than a third of its staff, while its private equity owners raked in tens of millions of dollars in management fees. According to Axios, since 2019, Gannett has dropped its number of local-focused websites by 117, and it decreased its number of weekly newspapers by 127. Today, one of Gannett's largest shareholders is another private equity firm called Apollo Capital. And Apollo is run by Mark Rowan, a man who literally just weeks ago was considered one of Trump's top contenders to be Treasury Secretary. So Donald Trump is bringing an expensive lawsuit against the Des Moines Register, and at the same time, he is surrounding himself with the billionaires and private equity managers who have been working to drain that newspaper, and others like it, of precisely the resources they need to fight back. All of this is happening at a time when America's billionaires are tripping over themselves to kiss Trump's ring. Today, Netflix CEO Ted Sarandos is reportedly meeting with Trump at Mar-a-Lago. That comes as we are learning that Trump has either met with or is expected to meet with Amazon founder and Washington Post owner Jeff Bezos, Apple CEO Tim Cook, and Alphabet CEO Sundar Pichai. Late last week, the Wall Street Journal reported that the day before Thanksgiving, Meta's CEO Mark Zuckerberg dined with the president-elect on a patio at Mar-a-Lago. At one point, Zuckerberg and other attendees stood, hand over heart, as the club played a rendition of the national anthem sung by imprisoned defendants who are accused of crimes related to the January 6th Capitol riot. The irony of pledging allegiance to a song sung by accused insurrectionists maybe didn't register for Mark Zuckerberg, or maybe he just didn't care.
This is one of the big differences, I think, between, we were talking about it before, one of the big differences between the first term. In the first term, everybody was fighting me. In this term, everybody wants to be my friend. I don't know. My personality changed or something.
Joining me now is Rick Hasen, director of the Safeguarding Democracy Project at UCLA Law. Rick, thank you for being here tonight. I first just want to talk to you about the scope of this lawsuit against the Des Moines Register. It is not a defamation suit, similar to the ABC lawsuit. It is been filed under Iowa's Consumer Fraud Act. How is that meaningful? How is that a meaningful difference? And what does that entail? What is the sort of difference between that and a classic defamation suit?
Well, so this law is primarily meant to protect consumers who are sold fraudulent goods, sold goods without warranties, bilked out of money. It's not typically used for political purposes. It's not typically used for polling. And so there are really, I think, three big hurdles that Trump would face in this lawsuit, assuming that it goes forward from this complaint. First is that he probably can't prove some of the elements of the complaint, like that the Des Moines Register made false statements. So long as they were accurately reporting the results of their poll, there's nothing false there. They also don't seem to have been providing any false information to deceive consumers. Trump goes out of his way to talk about how this is merchandise and services can count as merchandise. It's very convoluted. It doesn't really fit. So that's another problem. And then there's a bigger problem, which is the First Amendment. Defamation, like this Iowa suit, it's a kind of tort suit. The one is common law, one is statutory. But what the Supreme Court has said is that when it comes to political speech in the defamation context, we need to provide breathing room when people criticize public figures. And so you have to prove what's called actual malice, which means the statements are made either with knowing falsity or with reckless disregard as to whether it's true or false. And although I'm not aware of any cases where the Iowa consumer fraud statute has been subject to an actual malice standard, in this context, where you have a candidate trying to attack a poll he doesn't like just because he didn't like the result without any evidence that it was a falsified poll, it seems to me there's going to be a strong First Amendment defense here if we even got to whether or not the elements of the tort could be met.
Yeah, I mean, I'm having a bit of a hard time understanding the basic logic if we're looking at it from the consumer fraud piece. Like, Ann Selzer and the Des Moines Register are to some degree discredited by the virtue of the fact that this poll was so off, right? Like, a company doesn't willfully make products that it knows are going to be defective and revealed in stunning fashion to be defective because that's bad for business, right? That's just a very kind of ill-advised sort of fraud, if in fact it is even fraud, right? Basic logic dictates that they would want to be accurate as opposed to being inaccurate from a consumer kind of business marketplace standpoint. Is that right?
Sure. And remember who the plaintiff is here is Donald Trump. He's lost money because of this. It's just the whole thing doesn't fit. And you might ask, well, why didn't he just sue for defamation? Well, because he wouldn't be able to meet the requirements to prove defamation. This is very different than the ABC suit, where there was a statement that was made by someone, and you could argue about whether that statement was false and whether it was made with actual malice. Here, this is kind of garden variety polling. And, I can't get into anyone's head, but it sure seems like this lawsuit is meant to deter negative information about Donald Trump, whether it's polling or something else. It's meant to be a deterrent because,
right.
When you buy a lawsuit, even if it's non-meritorious, it's very expensive to litigate these things. And of course, when you're litigating against one of the most powerful people in the world, that itself can be quite intimidating.
Rick, Trump said that he really wants his DOJ to be fighting these battles in the future on his behalf. This is what he said. Let's just take a listen to that really quickly.
And I feel I have to do this. I shouldn't really be the one to do it. It should have been Justice Department or somebody else, but I have to do it. It costs a lot of money to do it, but we have to straighten out the press. Our press is very corrupt.
Is that feasible? I mean, should we look forward to, as members of the press, the DOJ launching suits like this? Or is that a sort of a dream that may have to be deferred, given the fact that the Justice Department, I don't know, sometimes is run according to the actual law?
Well, we don't know what the political appointees of the Justice Department have planned. I mean, there are lots of things that could be done to deal with the press. For example, going after journalists who refuse to reveal confidential sources. There are certain kinds of protections that are not necessarily constitutionally required for the press, but that the Biden Department of Justice has been willing to put in place in order to protect the press as an important part of our society and serving a function in investigating and in educating the public. Even if there are no lawsuits being filed against the press, there's plenty that can be done that could undermine the investigative functions of the press, and that could, especially when you're talking about smaller entities, could deter them if they don't have the resources, or if they're even larger entities, if the corporate sponsors of those entities don't want the fight. You might see them, like ABC News, just rolling over and saying, I'm not going to fight this battle this time.